The single biggest reason Cuba became the world's top producer of sugar and one of the richest countries in Latin America has to do with its location and its land. Cuba has warm, sunny weather ideal for tourism and really fertile soil, which is perfect for growing sugarcane. Plus, it's close to the largest economy in the world, the United States. In an ironic twist of fate, the island that once dominated the global sugar market today finds itself importing the very commodity it once exported in abundance to meet the demands of its own population. One of the most dramatic events impacting its economy was the dissolution of the Soviet Union on 26 December 1991. Throughout the Cold War, Cuba relied heavily on the Soviet Union for economic support. The Soviets provided Cuba with financial assistance and bought Cuban sugar at prices well above what others would pay on the global market. But when the Soviet Union disintegrated, Cuba lost its main trading partner and financial lifeline in an instant. This triggered a severe economic crisis known as the Special Period during the 1990s, marked by food shortages, power outages, and a severe drop in the quality of life. The shock was so great that Cuba's economy has yet to fully recover, continuing to deal with significant economic struggles. But it wasn't always like this. There was a long period of time when this country enjoyed prosperity. Back in the 1800s, lots of American business people and moneylenders came to Cuba. They spent their money to create huge sugar farms and factories. This turned Cuba into a big machine for making sugar. As a result, Cuba became the main place where the United States got its sugar from. In fact, it became the top seller of sugar in the entire world, accounting for 1/3 of total production, especially in the 1940s and 1950s. And sugar wasn't the only star. Cuba's perfect climate and soil also made it a top producer of high-quality tobacco and cigars, loved around the world, especially in Europe and North America. Also, Cuba's stunning natural beauty, sunny weather, and lively culture made it a favorite spot for tourists, in particular from the United States. Not to forget, the island is rich in minerals like nickel and cobalt, and before the revolution, American and Canadian companies invested heavily in mining operations on the island. But down to the problem, why Cuba became terribly poor. In 1959, a revolution led by Fidel Castro and his rebel comrades, including the legendary Che Guevara, shook Cuba's very foundations. Castro's bold ascent to power unleashed a series of socialist reforms, nationalizing industries and redistributing wealth. But this newfound independence didn't sit well with the United States, viewing Cuba as a threat to its regional interests. This marked the start of a troubled period in Cuba's history, changing its path and influencing its difficult relationship with the rest of the world. When Castro's government started to roll out its socialist plans, it found itself targeted by America. The United States quickly responded by putting a tough economic block on Cuba. Feeling cornered, Cuba turned to the Soviet Union for help, starting a strong partnership that led to the island country getting much-needed economic help and military support. This alliance caused tensions with the US to reach an all-time high, leading to the terrifying Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, a moment when the world was literally on the brink of a nuclear war. During the 1970s and 1980s, Cuba found itself economically strangled due to a tough embargo enforced by the United States. This embargo not only cut off Cuba from its primary market, but also isolated it from global financial systems, severely limiting its ability to secure loans or attract foreign investments. In this climate of isolation, the Soviet Union emerged as Cuba's economic savior. The assistance provided by the Soviet Union targeted different areas of the island's economy. First, there were generous subsidies that kept Cuba's economy afloat, essentially providing a safety net for its socialist policies. Trade agreements were also established that enabled Cuba to sell its sugar, tobacco, and other exports at prices often much higher than what the global market would offer. Additionally, the Soviet Union provided Cuba with a stable supply of oil, which was a lifeline for its energy needs, and military equipment that allowed Cuba to keep a strong defensive stance in a hostile geopolitical climate. Financial aid came in many forms, from outright grants to favorable trade credits. But the help from the Soviet Union wasn't a fix-all solution. The Soviet Union was dealing with its own set of economic and political issues, stagnation, corruption, and pressure to maintain its own global influence. By the late 1980s, it was clear that the Soviet model was unsustainable, culminating in its eventual dissolution in 1991. When that happened, Cuba lost its main supporter almost overnight. The lifeline of subsidies and trade was cut, plunging Cuba into economic chaos. This period of extreme hardship, characterized by a sudden scarcity of basic resources, soaring unemployment rates, and a steep decline in living standards, was called the Special Period. And so, the end of the Cold War brought not peace and prosperity for Cuba, but a crisis that would reshape its economy and society in profound ways. In that time, Cuba's economy was in the middle of a storm, as devastating as any Caribbean hurricane. Between 1989 and 1993, the nation's GDP fell by 35%, reflecting a grim reality of industrial collapse and vanishing wealth. This industrial decline was severe, with production falling by over 80% within the same period. And to make matters worse, the global markets were hard on Cuba. Exports fell by 79% from 1989 to 1991, as the Soviet market suddenly vanished. This special period in Cuba was a time of extremes for its people. Basic commodities like food and fuel became treasures, with the government enforcing rationing as queues snaked around city blocks. Yet, among all this hardship, a bicycle revolution was born. With fuel now a scarce luxury, bicycles flooded the streets, imported in vast quantities from China, and even produced domestically. However, the changes went deeper than just transportation and employment. They reached into the very heart of Cuban households: the dining table. With livestock becoming a scarce resource and a suffocating embargo limiting imports, Cubans turned to creative methods to feed themselves. Rooftop gardens appeared across urban landscapes, and community farms transformed empty lots into pockets of greenery. This was Cuba's own brand of urban agriculture, a necessity rather than a choice. Yet, despite their best efforts, the food produced was far from sufficient to sustain the population. The statistics are staggering. The average person lost around 12 pounds or about 5.5 kilos during the most critical years of the crisis. In the face of the 90s crisis, Cuba started economic reforms to mitigate the impact of the special period. One of the most noticeable changes was the legalization of the US dollar, allowing for a dual currency system that effectively created an economic divide among the population. The government also opened up to limited private enterprise. For example, Cubans were allowed to open small restaurants, known as paladars, in their homes. This not only boosted the economy, but also gave rise to a new class of entrepreneurs. Similarly, foreign investments were encouraged, especially in the tourism sector. International hotel chains started establishing themselves in Cuban tourist spots, significantly boosting tourism revenue, but also leading to increased prices in local goods and services, making them less accessible for ordinary Cubans. While these reforms were successful in improving certain economic metrics, they also had unintended consequences, making income inequality even worse and introducing new social and economic disparities. As a result of these changes and challenges, the country presents striking contrasts. While its economic system promotes equality, a clear divide exists between those who receive foreign remittances and those who don't, creating a massive disparity in living standards. Despite a relatively good education system producing a skilled workforce, many professionals are underemployed or working in jobs outside their field due to the limited job market. And while every Cuban can access free healthcare, the system continuously fights against a persistent shortage of medical supplies, and hospitals have to deal with daily power cuts. In 2014, under the Obama administration, the US and Cuba took steps towards normalizing relations, easing travel restrictions, and re-establishing diplomatic ties. However, with the Trump administration, US-Cuba relations became more contentious again. This situation hasn't improved much with Biden, and it looks like it's going to stay that way for some time. Today, Cuba faces many challenges. Outdated infrastructure has left it with dilapidated roads and buildings, stopping domestic progress and deterring potential foreign investments. Meanwhile, its technological landscape is almost non-existent, stifling innovation and modernization efforts crucial for global competitiveness. On top of that, Cuba's economic system puts strict limitations on private enterprises, often putting them through cumbersome regulations and high taxes that cripple growth. But these internal issues are only part of the story. They are exacerbated by mounting external pressures such as trade embargoes and diplomatic tensions. It's a combination of factors that has left the nation in an uncertain position, making its way between the push for economic reforms and the pull of preserving its unique socialist identity. As Fidel Castro once said, "A revolution is not a bed of roses," but it's clear that a brighter, rosier future awaits Cuba when its economic and political systems go through another revolution. Your support means a lot to us. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up or subscribe to our channel for more content like this.